Hello, Ken Spriggs here with part 2 of my new build of my junked up N1 Starfighter from Revell, or as the great suggestion from the master Lou Del Meso, Na1 Na2 build, and a lot of progress on this ship. Having a lot of fun with this build because I don't have to be very careful with how I paint it. In fact, I don't want to be careful. The painting is going to be chewed up and messed up and damaged and scratched and a lot of different things. So I can just have fun with it. A lot more modifications, a lot of scratch building, adding additional parts, things like that. So in this video, I'll pretty much complete the ship itself in its main form, or what I want to call its junked up weathered base. I'm going to do a little bit more on it once I get it on the diorama with adding additional junk and things like that. But I will finish up in this video the main ship with all the top of it, the engines, the added structures, things like that. A few more details I have to complete later on once I get it positioned onto the base. All right, well, let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so I completed this section here in the front. I think that turned out really well. For these side pieces, I just made some thin styrene, put some half round on it, some square stock, some more half round down here on the bottom. Same over there. I took some very thin 0.010 styrene. It looks pretty rough, but that's okay. I want this to be kind of chewed up and dirty and rusty and nasty. So, and that little U-shaped piece there to give it some detail. Sorry for the focus. That part there in the middle is from a Y-wing kit from Van Dyke. It's one of the side pieces that one of these parts, and I cut off a section of it from the side. It's okay that it has a little bit of a curve. It just gives me some detail down inside of there. So that can be painted easily even after I get the different parts onto it. Right now what I'm doing is I have this part here taped in place, and I added some round tube and some square rod on the sides to give it some connection to the rest of it. You'll notice that little piece of rough plastic there, I cut the like the rounded pin connector off of there on both sides to kind of show that that whole section is open, and that these other pieces are actual frames for the wings without any structure on them. I might still do that with this piece. What I might do is possibly cut this off. But then again, that wouldn't really work, because here's the problem. This worked really well because it looks like this whole structure is a part of that main section with all the mechanisms and everything else. That's all connected together to give it structural integrity for the wings. Not sure why that piece would be coming through and why it would be like a separate bar. We'll see. I might just square it off. I still have to put something into this section
in between this and this sidewall, there's something there. Well, there's a gap. So I might have to do something with that as well. Let me put that in and show you what I'm talking about. All right, so when the cockpit is in, you have this big open section here. So I may still do that. I may still cut that out. And I can try to fashion something in there. Maybe even something like that rounded tube to give that an idea that that piece is missing. Let me play with that first, because I might want to attach that onto this third plate as well. Yeah, let me do that. The trick to this is I'm just kind of making this up as I go. I'm using the images, of course, but I don't have enough angles to figure out how everything looks. So a lot of this I'm just kind of doing on my own. So before I glue this piece, this is all glued on in solid. This is just fine. And I can paint this without any problem. But before I get this piece on, I'm just trying to get everything fashioned. I might want to turn this into a similar thing. I might want to cut this part out, cut some of this away, and make this like a beam for the wing that's uncovered. I don't want this to be part of the upper shell, the plating. And then what I could do is I could fashion one of these down in here, maybe a little smaller one, and connect it onto this. That sounds pretty good. But I still have to figure out what I'm putting in this area here. Over here. All right. But let me play with that a little bit and see what I can do. All right, so I did go ahead and do a lot more surgery on this to give you the idea that this is a beam and not an actual part of the wing, which it really is, just like I did up here. So the wing itself actually extends straight out to this way, so this whole area would be the wing on the actual surface of the ship. So in the show where they're showing this, none of the top surface of the wing panels are there at all, or even the bottom. You just have the beams exposed. So you have this main beam here, there's another beam here. This also comes up and has a connection up here, which I'll do at some point. So this one comes down and it meets up. And both of these come into these rounded section, almost like a pivot point. So I'm making the rounded section here as well. So I cut out all of that whole section around this, so it just shows that as being a beam. It is still connected underneath, of course. And then I put some of the thin styrene stripping on top to give it that U-beam look like I did up here, to give it the idea. And it appears to go through the top beam to give it some structural integrity. All right. I also added some detail on the inside of this. You can see there with some of the U-beam, some little parts from a Y-wing as well. I have several parts from Y-wings, a couple Y-wing kits that I got that are really nice kit bashing parts. And then I also put that, I flattened that U-beam down on the bottom, because you can see all the way through the section into the bottom inside of the bottom hull, I just wanted to give it an idea that something's down there. It's a very narrow space and you're not really going to see too much in there, but I wanted something to be there. And I put that piece of round tube as well, give you an idea that there's like a main pipe or support coming through it. All right, and I did the same on the front piece. This is the inside, so this is a part that faces the front. This is the back. There are those rounded tubes that are going to match up on the ends of these to give you the same idea that this has. And so I went ahead and got some paint on these because it's going to be harder to airbrush down in there once I get this glued in place in front of it. It's a narrow channel. So I did steel this time, Vallejo steel, and then I did my oily steel over top of it to give it that worn, dirty look. I also have some U-beams on this, a little circle of styrene to give a little more depth that wasn't quite meeting up with that tube, so I just wanted that to be on there. I have these tubes and some square stock on the end, and then these little pieces from the Y-wing as well. I'm still going to be able to get a brush down in there and get that weathered once this is glued together, but I can't go any further until I get this piece glued in place, and then I can go further. I also created another plate, so just like this one is 2 parts sandwiched with machinery in between, so is this one going to be that. A little thinner, but it's going to be there as well. So let me put this in there and I'll show you how that's going to look at this point. All right, so this plate is going to go right there, and those little squared off parts go right in and match up with that. And you can see, so you can see down inside that channel, and that's going to be a lot dirtier too. I'm going to really weather that up with oils and make it look dirty and that kind of thing once I'm done. And then this plate is going to go in front of it to sandwich that off, and again give it the appearance that this whole inner structure is attached onto this beam, just like this one is attached onto this beam to give it the structural integrity for the wings. This one's a little thinner than the big one up here, and I'm going to use some different type of machinery inside. But likewise, I also cut out the round holes for the pipes and the rectangular for the rectangular tubes that I have that are going to go through. So I made one other modification which was necessary because of the space that I have here. So let me go ahead and get the cockpit and show you that. All right, so I cut off the front of the machinery area on the cockpit because there just wasn't enough space to accommodate 2 separate, this separate wall. So for this one to fit into there, I had to cut that off so it would give me some room to work with for that to slide down in there and give it that general look. It's not all the way down in there, of course. And then what will happen is this isn't positioned right, of course, but once I'm done, the rounded and the squared parts will come through and will actually terminate right here on the inside of this machinery part, and then I'll be able to run hoses through this all the way through to give it that idea that these are some connection points coming through it. So cutting that whole front off of there made this a lot easier. And then in addition, rather than what I was going to have to do is to glue in the cockpit, so I could then glue these rectangular tubes and round tubes through these onto the end of this. I don't have to do that. Now what I'll do is I'll just continue to put together these 2 pieces, and then I'll be able to go ahead and put that in afterwards. All right, so what I'll be able to do is once I get this plate glued in, then I can go ahead and work on the machinery that goes in between the two plates, this plate in the back and this front plate. I'll glue them onto this inner part, so that this part piece here. So then all I have to do is glue this onto that. And any of these outer surfaces like this, and then this one on the outer part, I can paint those afterwards. I just had to get painted on the inside first because that would have been hard to get to. Same with these tubes. I'm not going to paint these before I put them in. I can certainly get paint onto them, any of the visible parts that you're going to see, and then and also get weathering down inside of this area too once I'm done. But these tubes, once they're glued in place, they're going to terminate right at the surfaces. They're not going to go through. They're just going to terminate right at these holes, and then what I'll do is I'll use some needle files, that kind of thing, to clean up the areas around them to give it the look like this plate is where they end, and this plate is up against this right here. So the tubes themselves will not extend into the cockpit, well, into this machinery area. They'll just end right at this wall. And then, you know, I'll be able to run hoses and things through it and make it look like they're just conduits, as well as structural beams, that kind of thing. And so I can have all of this done, including this plate, glued onto the back of this, and even get it painted before I have to even put the cockpit in. Because then I have to also work on the machinery that's going to replace this big open gap here now. And I'm looking at some of the screenshots to get an idea of what's there. There's some big flat machinery with some controls on it maybe. It's kind of weird looking, but we'll figure that out. All right, so for now, let me get this piece glued in. Let me get that part done, and then we'll get this whole section completed so I can then move on to working on some other areas. All right, so quite a bit more done on the ship. I got this front whole piece completed. As I showed in the stills, I used a piece of a Y-wing there in the center. Put some styrene bits around the sides of it. I also put that little thin styrene rod across it. And then I used some thin styrene that I bent and molded to look like, basically like some leaf springs over top of those rounded parts, and put a couple of half round bits on the inside of it. So that goes up over top of that rounded piece and down underneath that center part. And the same with over here. Glue that in place. So you can see I did a lot of weathering as well, with some oils to make that more dirty. And I still have to do some more things. I got the tubes in, the square tube, or the rectangular tubes, the round tubes, got those glued in place. Have them coming in right down there on the inside. Okay. Then I got the cockpit glued in. It's all in there nice and sturdy. And I even put in some 5-minute epoxy on the bottom to give it a nice sturdy connection there onto the front part. The bottom's open, but that doesn't matter because that's not going to be seen. It's going to be hidden under the bottom. And then for the two open parts, I used some more of my cast resin material and made a piece that fits inside of there, put a little bit of styrene on front of it. And then I cut out a piece with some styrene, tried to match it up as close as I could from the stills from the show. That little box right there is a piece from a Y wing, which I cut off and glued onto there. A piece of stripping on there too, and just cut a hole in it. This particular cast resin part, I started with some black, and then I dry brushed some steel over it to make it look darker. And you're not going to see a lot of it. I just wanted some detail behind it, but I didn't want it to be exactly the same as this piece right here. But it's the same material, of course, same design. All right, and I weathered that up with some oils. That's looking pretty sweet. Put that in there in a second. And then I made this this plate, which I carved from some thin styrene. I just have it on a post. Cut some notches out, put some little attachment pins up on the top. So at one point during the shots, we see this over here, and it's just sort of hanging down from here. Then a little bit later, we see this piece underneath it. So things move around during the montage. You see different pieces that are exposed and then they're not exposed and that kind of thing. So I liked this detail and I want that over on this side. So I decided to put this over on the other side. And that'll cover that gap over there as well. So I don't need to put anything underneath it. And I used the salt and hairspray technique. Painted it with the aluminum. Let it dry. Put some hairspray dabbed on it. A little bit of salt. I bent it up a little bit to look like it's kind of a beat up plate. And I can leave this rod on it, this tube on it, because that'll help me to stick it inside and hold it while I'm positioning it over top. I'm probably going to have it with something like, you know, an angled kind of a thing. I don't want to obscure too much of the detail, but there isn't much going on over here. And this is the side that we're looking at it from anyway. So that'll be cool. Give it a little bit more yellow in that area. All right. So let me just get this glued in place. And probably that one too. And then that'll finish up this whole area right here. And then I can continue working on the front of it. All right, there we go. So I painted that. I took some U-shaped stripping, and I cut off one edge of it, and I glued it down along that edge right there because that was a rough edge. I also glued down some square stock along that edge right there, and the other edge as well. You can't see it because it's underneath that plating, but I painted that rubber black to give it the idea that it's like a rubber gasket. See if I can get a better look at it. You can kind of see it there. It's kind of a rough edge. I had to bend it and twist it a bit, but I like it looking like that because it gives you the idea that it is kind of a flexible rubber gasket. And over this end too. And then that piece right there on top would be like a rubber gasket as well for whatever goes on top. The plating, sealing off the engine parts, who knows. But it looks cool. Got the plate glued down. I bent it up a bit, and I wanted it to be sort of like on a bit of an odd angle because it's just a loose plate, just kind of sitting on top of it right now. All right. So for right now, other than adding more junk and things inside of it, maybe a little more weathering, from like this point on back, this part's all done on the top anyway. And the same with the cockpit. I have to junk that up some more. Maybe do some more weathering on the outside. But everything now is accessible. I can get to all the parts out here that I want to weather. Everything underneath is already done. So that part in there is already oiled up and weathered to show me what I want to make it look like it's real dirty and greasy. I have to do a little bit more on those tubes in there that are still aluminum. I have to weather those some more. But I can get to those as well. That's the idea. And I didn't paint anything on the front right now until I get the rest of the front structure in place, which will be the next thing that I'll work on. So, all right. But I think that's looking pretty fantastic. Definitely looking like a beat up, junked up, badly weathered and dirty ship. So, okay. All right, so some more major surgery on the front of this. As I explained previously on my last part of this build, the first part of it, I had to first solidify this front structure so that these were positioned correctly, oriented correctly, and that everything is held together because of the odd curves and angles and that sort of thing. So now that I've gotten all of this in place and this is nice and solid, I cut off the entire front and it doesn't hurt anything. It doesn't change the stability of this. It's still nice and solid and rigid. So it doesn't hurt anything at this point. But I couldn't really do it early on because of the fact that I needed to get this shored up first. So what I'm working on right now is I'm working on the front section since I've got this plate. So this is that plate. Let me pull this over here. Hold on a second. So you can see what I'm talking about. All right. Okay, so this structure here is this right here. And then you can see here's the rectangular tubes coming out. Here's some round tubes. And actually, as you can see, the round tubes kind of terminate right here, but there's this weird looking whatever it is. I don't know if those are cables or what they are. I'm going to probably use cables. But they come out of these tubes, so the tubes terminate up here, which is what I did. But then you have this whole flat part. You have another shorter piece of framework that goes over these two rectangular tubes so that it just basically incorporates them. You have this angled piece of metal, thin metal coming down, giving it the idea again that the whole front is curving down. This kind of looks like the front of the actual ship, but it's all chewed up. And of course you have these weird pieces. I'm guessing it's supposed to come up a little bit, and these are supposed to come up and meet some other things. I'm not sure, but I will reproduce that part, of course. So then you have the beams. So that's these right here, continuing on. Now I did cut away some more of this because it looks like this part here is simply sticking out of the beam. But I think that's going to be good enough. Actually, I noticed it has that bit of an angle. So what I'll do is I'll cut some of that off. Probably over here too. Probably cut that off, make it look angled, because I'm going to beef up this piece and make it look a lot thicker like this. Giving it again the idea that there's no top onto this at all. These are simply the beams of the structure, and so are these, but these are pretty beefy. They're thin out here, of course, because the wings get thinner, but the part that would be inside of the ship is very thick. So I'm gonna thicken that up, and then that's actually going to come in. You can see it comes in and meets up with where those tubes are. So it comes into about here on both sides. It looks like it basically meets up with this part right here. And then you have this weird looking piece that comes around it and some other little parts and pieces. All right, so I initially cut out this piece of styrene that it meets up with the curves on the inside right here, but obviously I'd have to add some more things to it. But that's the piece that we're looking at that is right here. Now it's hard to see under here, but I'm just assuming that it comes up and meets kind of the bottom of these, because this piece then is attached onto that, and these are attached onto that as well. So it's probably just a centerpiece going down the middle, and then other structures come off of it and underneath it. All right. So that's what I'm working on right now. So I didn't need any of the rest of this in the front since I'm reproducing the missing parts, and I'll use some thinner styrene to replicate this part here, which is obviously some bent part of the inner structure that was removed or chewed up or whatever. So, okay. All right, so as you can see from the previous stills, a lot more scratch building, and I completed the front section. So I didn't stop to film every part. I was kind of on a roll. So obviously I went ahead and had these flat parts here that I glued in place. I added a little bit of stripping along the edge to make it look filled in. I added a strip back in the back because it was back too far, so I moved it up a little bit. I built a structure underneath, which you're not really going to see, but you do kind of see in the show these disc-looking things with ridges in them. Now I understand that they would not be below the actual bottom of the hull, but for the purposes of this build, we're pretending that is not the bottom of the hull. Just like we're pretending that this is not part of the wing, it's inside of the wing, and so on. So the idea is that from this point on, everything is stripped away. Or even here, there's nothing covering the top paneling, that sort of thing. But even here, there's really no structure. There's a lot of other things that are missing. So I just wanted to have a little bit of structure, and you can see it from the front. If you look underneath, you can see that there, just to give it an idea. And I tried to put in some curved parts that look like it would match the contours of the bottom, because there will be nothing on top of this underneath. That's all completed, and I'm not going to do any more detail underneath. Now I did drill some holes so that when I run some of my thin black rubber coated wiring through these tubes, it's going to come out and go down through there and feed in, and I'll just terminate it underneath because you're not going to see it. But I also went back in, so I created this little detail here. I created these details. I chewed this up a little bit more, and I cut it a little bit more into profile for this part and nicked it up a lot. And all this is going to be dirty and weathered once I'm done painting it. Of course, I made these panels here, which look like they're beams of some kind that are holding in place the main beam structures going into the wings. Okay. Those parts were a little tricky because I had to, I started with this L-shaped piece and made two of them, one for the top, one for the bottom. Then I glued on some parts around it, some thin styrene, glued it on the bottom, filled in the parts that you would see, like the end on this side and over there. Some of it is still open underneath, but you're not really going to see it because it's obscured by the other beams. I also made these two little pieces in the same way, just using different pieces of styrene sheet that I cut and shaped and glued together and made different looks. I tried to imitate what I saw in the stills, but again, the only thing I'm seeing in the stills is I'm seeing it from this angle, like right about here. So that looks really good compared to what I see in the show. A lot of the images are there. It looks pretty awesome. So I'm ready to go ahead and get some paint. So I'm going to mask off some of this. I'm going to get this part painted, all of this painted, underneath painted. I'm not going to paint the engines just yet. Obviously, there's some work to do. But other than this, I did go ahead and redo these little pieces here. They were looking a bit soft, and I didn't like them, so I cut them in a little bit thicker styrene, glued those on. What I'll probably do is still tape over that. I can paint those by hand. Since everything else is already painted, I don't want to overly paint it. But I can get a little more paint on this. Obviously, all of this, everything underneath. And then once that's done, I'll be ready to go ahead and wire in the what's supposed to be hoses. And what I'm using is this very thin wire that I get from Amazon. sorry for the focus. It's black rubber coated wire, but it's nice and thin, and I can crinkle it up, and I can certainly weather it and dirty it, but I'll have that running through and looking like there's some hoses or control cables, that kind of thing coming through. And then I'll start doing some weathering and get this weathered as well. But for now, all of this structure is done. Everything up here is done with the exception of the engines, which will be the next thing that I'll start focusing on once I get all of this completed and weathered. All right. All right, here is the completed weathering for right now. Obviously, like I said, I'll do some more once I get everything going with the diorama. So I did run some of this wiring through here, down into the bottom, glued those in place. It's very, very dirty, and that's kind of the idea. What I might end up doing is I want it to be like dusty and dirty that way as well. So I might have some weathering powders over top of it to give it that dusty look when I'm done, which will also, you know, lighten up the dirtiness a little bit more. But for right now, I think that's a really good, what I'm calling my weathering base coat. Get those wires going just back into there randomly. This front is especially really chewed up and dirty and greasy. I did kind of mock up the rest of it just to kind of give you an idea of how the ship's going to look, or starting to look. This is a piece from a Y-wing, which I'm going to fix up a little bit. This side over here has sort of a tube sticking out and some machinery. This one over here still has the cone on it from the original Na2 fighter. This is actually half of a 3D printed canopy for the 3D printed version of the N1 that I did. So if I print a second one and glue them together, I can sand them up. It was really hard trying to find a conical shape like this that's narrow enough, like this. I think that's going to work out just fine. Once I get that, another half of that and glued together. Right now it's only half. Or, well, one canopy. I also cut out a lot of this one because both of these have a lot of the exposed framework still. So I'm going to rebuild some of this with some styrene, different shapes, like the U rod or the H, the beams, those kind of things. So I'll get that worked on next. But really happy with how all this turned out. I think that's going to be pretty fantastic. Definitely looks like a totally stripped down front of the ship, just sitting in a junkyard, getting all dirty and greasy over the years, and just looking like crap. I did put the I did glue those bottom pieces on. See, that's what I mean about half of the canopy. I did glue the bottom pieces of the engines on. It gives a little more stability. Just holding the bottom of the engine on, I'm sorry, bottom of the fuselage on. I don't have it connected yet. Because once that's on, it sets it up in a more even look for the ship. So these sit flat, more or less, and then it sits on the bottom of the bottom hull. The lower engine I still have to paint and get onto the bottom hull and get that attached at one point. So, all right, but this is how it's looking at the moment. I think it's looking pretty sweet. And I'll be working next onto the engines. I have to work on the engines on the inside, get those all built up, painted, make them look real dirty and greasy as well, and then work on the outer parts of the engines. Ultimately, this part will be yellow as well, possibly a little further up. I have to look and see, but there's definitely some traces of yellow on these. The rest are going to be the metallic, the aluminum with the oily steel. Then you're going to have the chrome on the front, but even that is going to be really dirtied up because it's sitting probably in a junkyard before she got it, before Pellimato got it. I've started work on the engines, and as I mentioned in the previous video, I did some modifications on the left engine. And when I say left and right, I'm referring to the passenger's orientation. I guess you would say port and starboard, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, this is the one, if you're facing, this is the front of the ship. This is the one on this side. This is the one on the opposite side. So, when they're done, the left engine has the top on it, and it's more complete. It has less panels missing than the right engine. The right engine still has just the framework right here, as you can see. Other than that, the bottoms of the engines are the same. Now, also, the front scoop is different. The one on this side has this little bit on top because it has that corresponding finished part on top. This one does not. So this one is smooth on top. This one has that little bit of a intake scoop, I guess it would be. I don't know what that is. They both have the bottom part. So an interesting little note. I'll have to look at the episode again, but I'm pretty certain that at one point we have Mando working on this engine, and he has the little pit droid, or one of the droids, and there's the part that goes on top, and he asks him to show him where it goes, and he'd use the little laser 3D imagery to show it. But they show it on this side, but this isn't the side that's finished when we're all done. The other side is. So I think it's just a bit of a continuity error. But in any case, one side has the finished part, one does not. Let me get that part and I'll show you. All right, so here's that part that I cut out of this. And I'm certain that this is, in fact, the right side, because each of these engines can only go on one way. This whole part on the inside is cut out to accommodate the wing tip. This side is flat. So they only go on one way. And obviously, this is the back, this is the front. So there's no way to mix them up. They have to go that way. So definitely it is the left engine, when you're looking at it from the pilot's perspective, that had this piece on it, not the right engine. But in any case, so I cut that out. And of course, just like the rest of the ship, there is no structure underneath. So this was a big gaping hole. So I used some U-shaped beam or stripping there in the back. I used some L shape for the rest, and I just reconstructed it. I kept these pieces on it that have that little bit there, and I drilled those holes out the idea is that's supposed to be a tab for where the plating bolts onto it. I'm assuming same with this U beam, and that U beam that I had just happened to be the right size that matched up with the part of the kit which was there, because on this one, obviously in this one it's fully exposed. On this one only a bit of it is, and it meets up with this part here. So there's still a gap and an opening where there's plates missing, just not as pronounced. So I pretty much just built it the same as this one. I also used some rectangular rod to fill in this little square that goes there. And I used some other pieces to fill in the blanks. I had to do a little bit of adjustment on one of the engines. Yeah, I had to just sand out a little bit of this little notch because that's what meets up with it. So on the inside of this part, you have this structure. Apologize for the noise outside. It's very nice out today, and I have my patio door open, and of course they're mowing the lawn in my apartment. All right, so I had to adjust it just a little bit. These engines are identical. They don't have more than one side. All right, hold on a second. Sorry, I went ahead and closed my door for momentarily. That time of year, obviously. All right, so they're very similar in the end. Now this one, of course, is still going to have that part in the top. I'm not going to sand that off because the idea, again, is that this is still the right piece, but there wouldn't be the top on it. Not at this point, whenever they're building it, at this part of the build montage. So that's all ready to go. I think that turned out really nicely. It's going to look really cool. So now the next thing to do is to finish working on these engines. Get there's some hoses on them. Get them painted like I did on my first build. And they're going to be similarly dirty. I'm not going to do any extra modifications like I did on the first one. I'm not going to light anything here. I'm not going to add any extra wires or anything in it. We'll see. I might still put some extra junk parts in there since they're going to be more visible between or underneath these two engine tops. And then I can, once I get these done and painted, I have to get these done first. I can get them into the bottom half of the engines, and then I can go ahead and see about putting these on. And I'll do what I did on the first build. I'll paint these first because it's going to be hard to mask off that engine inside. So I'll do the aluminum with the oily steel. But also some of this, and I have to look at some screenshots, but certainly the back piece is going to be yellow. Possibly the exposed part of this is as well. I have to look and see. I think maybe the demarcation line is here. Might even be further. I'll have to look and see. But some of this is going to be yellow. And then I'll get that all painted and obviously use the salt and hairspray method to put some chewed up paint and that kind of thing on it. So this part will be done before I glue the engine's tops on, and then I can't really put on the back engine cap until the two halves of the engine are together, or the front. So we'll go ahead and keep working on that. Okay. All right, so more work on the engines. So on the still, at one point when we first see it, and again, I'm using the terminology from the cockpit, from the pilot's perspective, the right engine, or the right front scoop, has machinery in it and some kind of a tube sticking out with some wires on it and things like that, giving you the idea that machinery is there. The other one has on the rounded cone, narrow cone, excuse me, from the original Na1 Starfighter. And what I did was I used two parts of a 3D printed canopy from my original N1 build, glued them together. This one has some epoxy sculpt in it because I had modified this to make a clear canopy, so I filled it in so I could make a vacuum form canopy. So rather than have to print a new one, because I just had the two, I just cut it up and put it together. So once I got them glued together, the right profile, I did a lot of sanding to give it the cone look. And this one fits inside of this one here, giving you the idea of that cone. I looked around for several other things. I even considered maybe some models for some military, like a jet or some bombs or something. But I was looking around and found this and said, oh, that would work, because two of them together looks like that cone. So I think that'll work good. I think that'll look pretty cool. And then this piece is a part from a Y-wing kit, Bandai's Y-wing kit. And I modified it. I had to sand a lot of the outer parts off the back, drill a hole out, of course, put a tube in. I'm still going to put some additional wiring on this, but that's about it. That's about all it looks like. Maybe a few little pieces of stripping or something. The idea is that this goes inside here, of course. The idea is that this has the cone removed, and that's the internal machinery on whatever that cone is. And but ultimately, the final version, both of these are removed, and you have the open intake fans. So for now, I'm going to have those two different parts there. I also put together both of the internal engines and the hoses. Not going to do any other modifying of these. They're both the same. I previously showed rebuilding the structure on that one to be open. And then ultimately, I do have to cut out this part to some degree. There are some scenes where, there's a couple of scenes. When we first see it, there's actually some kind of structure, like, beams or something, structure sticking out. Kind of gives you the idea that that spire goes on top of it. Later, that's gone, and there's an opening, and then we see the pit droids with Peli Motto bringing in the spine, and it has some machinery sticking out of it that goes inside, and they're positioning it inside of this. I'm going to take that route, so I'm going to cut these out. I'm going to put something in there on both sides and just make it look like an opening for machinery that would accommodate that part. So, but for now, what I'm going to do is I'm ready to start painting. I'm going to go ahead and get some natural steel on these. I'm going to get probably, aluminum on these, and then oily steel, and then probably aluminum on this inner part. And then these three, I'm going to go ahead and get the black base coat for some alclad. And then I'm going to put the alclad, probably polished aluminum, I think. That's what I've used, on it to give these the glossy look. And I'm going to do these parts separately so I can get at them better before I glue them inside that part there. And even these ones, once they fully dry, I'm still going to do some light weathering on them, maybe with weathering powders to make them look a little bit dirty. They are still shinier and more of the shiny chrome, these ones here, than the rest of it is. But I'm definitely going to work on that. I can get some of the aluminum and oily steel on these too, because these are going to ultimately be yellow. And then I'll do some more research to see if any more of these parts are yellow once I get those together. So, okay. All right, so I painted the aluminum over top of the engines and these, the top and the bottoms of the engines, and did the oily steel speckling. So what I'm doing now is I taped off, I temporarily, I didn't glue on, I just tacked on the back part onto this one piece to make it easier to paint. And I'm doing the salt and hairspray technique. So I put on some salt and hairspray. I did notice on the, I did look at the screen stills to see where the yellow was. And a part of it You can't see it now where the tape is, but I had to score a line on with a scriber because there wasn't one there on the inside and the outside to give it that proper delineation, just so it wouldn't be just yellow paint ending. But that's where it goes to. So I taped off a lot of this on the ship, the bottom part. So let me go ahead and get the yellow on it and let that dry, and then I'll be able to rub that off with some water and a brush to get the speckled look. All right, so I went ahead and painted the yellow over top of the salt and hairspray and the aluminum. Took a brush and some warm water and removed it, so I got a nice dirty looking chipped up paint. I also cut out the end of these parts here in order to accommodate the internal engine parts. I'll show you here in a minute. Now the one here, I did glue a little bit more on this, so it's a little harder to remove. So this one I'm not going to try to pry off. This other one I did pry off. I did determine that I can still kind of get that to go over top of that and force it in place. It won't be a problem. So I didn't want to break it. But what I also did then is I made some inserts for the back of these engines. And I just used a piece from a Y-wing, little intake scoop there, 2 of them. In the middle, I put a tube with some rectangular stock that I made some ridges. What I want to do is I want to reproduce or redo one of the scenes in it where Pelimato and the droids are positioning the spire on this side into the engine. So I'm going to have them holding it up and moving it towards the engine. So I also modified this and I put a tube on it with some ridges. Sorry for the train in the background. Giving it the idea that this would go inside of this. And it actually does fit in there. Part of it does. It just doesn't go in all the way. So rather than try to make it smaller or whatever, it's going to be a little bit of a distance away. And they're going to be holding it up. She was directing the droids, some of the pit droids, to put it in and yelling at them, "What are you doing? Get it positioned in there right." So I made 2 of those. One's going to be on this side. It's just going to be open. There won't be any of these machinery in it. The other one is going to be like this, and it's going to be inside. It's going to be pretty cool. I still have to weather that really good with some oils. That fits in there nicely. And then this one will go over top once I get that part on there. I also got the engines painted and really dirtied up with some oils. Just some rubber black on the hoses, some hull red and some regular red on those panels. And then I really just dirtied it up with some oils to look really dirty, so they'll stand out inside of the engines as compared to the metallic. In addition, I finished up and painted these front scoops. So I put on the Alclad polished aluminum. This one here, I had that kit part from the Y-wing, and I added some extra things onto it and a piece of wire. And again, really greased that up and dirtied it up with some oils to look really cool. And then this other one, I made that cone that I showed you, talked about. Got that painted as well. I think that turned out really nicely. Both of these, I took some weathering powders and I just brushed them over it like a tan kind of a thing to be kind of dust to really bring down the really bright glossy shine to make it look more dirty. And I'll do the same with the rest of it with some weathering powders once I get it all together. So, okay. So, let me get this oiled up and these parts oiled up and put together. This I'm not going to paint just yet. I still have to put on the darker scorching and that kind of thing, but that'll be down the road. So, okay. All right, and here is the mostly finished, junked up N1 Starfighter. The only thing I have to complete is the bottom to be painted. I just have it mocked up on here right now. I have to put in the little insert here, and there's one on the other side that I have to put in there and get those dirtied up, but that'll come before I put the bottom on. You're really not going to see the bottom much, so I'm not really worrying about that. But otherwise, everything else is finished. The engines are all finished, attached. I will do a lot more work on it once I get it on the diorama. There's going to be other junk inside these compartments in the cockpit, something in here, that sort of thing. So there will definitely be more things getting done on it, but the next stage will be to start working on the diorama. By the way, this board that I have it on is what I'm going to be using. It's very nice. I got this from Hobby Lobby. It was some kind of a hanger thing you hang on the wall. It had two wooden slats with some hanger things on it, and the other side has an opening in it. I don't know if you put a picture or something, but this is perfect for what I want it to be. It's the right size for the ship. And what I'll end up doing is putting walls up on the sides and the back, and the front curved part will be open. And then I'll apply the other things onto it to make her workshop where she's building this or refurbishing this ship in the montage. So, all right, really happy with how it all turned out. Get some close-ups here. You got the exposed engine mechanics on this side, the original Na1 Starfighter cone on the other side. Really dirty, junked up engine parts inside. Really filthy, dirty, exposed framework in the front, most of it. You have the machinery for the engine spires on both sides. And as I showed before, I have the one spire that's going to be made up to be like it's getting inserted into this side over here. All right. So really happy with the progress on this. I'm going to start working on the diorama part, start looking at 3D printing the different elements that are going to go into it.
continue working, of course, on getting the bottom painted, that sort of thing. But happy with how this is turning out so far. And let me just finish up with a little video comparison between this one and the other version of the N1 that I built from Revell, and just showing you how the old beat up looks compared to the new. So it's pretty striking. All right, so really happy with the progress on this ship. This has been a really great build, a lot of fun with it. Liking how it's turning out and looking a lot like it does in the show at different points during the rebuilding, refurbishing montage. So next up, I'll be starting on the diorama part of it. So that'll involve a lot of other elements, including 3D printed parts and figures, a lot of junk, some sand, of course, since this is in here sandy workshop on Tatooine. But stay tuned, and thank you to all my new subscribers, and I will see you in the next installment.